Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller. It gives me it's a real treat to have our guest today, a tireless and true, fierce and fiery progressive from the great state of Maine, Betsy Sweet. How you doing, Betsy?
I'm great, Eric. How are you? Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Doing well. You're running for a Senate seat in Maine. Obviously, we're in the primary now, the election for which is next Tuesday, the 14th.
Yep, 6 days. 6 days and 2 hours away.
Right on. You had a debate last night. How'd it go? What was your perspective on that?
It was awesome, and we really got to have the distinguishing what the distinguishing issues are. And unfortunately, there's three of us in the race. And unfortunately, the person who is considered the front runner by some is pretty much backed by the Washington establishment and has decided as a strategy that they're not going to participate in debates. So while the other candidate and I have participated in over 15 forums and debates, this was the second one that she was willing to be in with us, and the only televised one. So so it was a big deal, and it was great. And I think it was really clear, I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for the Green New Deal. I'm for complete transparency in government. We can talk about money in politics, but anyway, and she's not. So there was really good distinctions made, and people got to see that.
Cool. Yeah, I have some things that I want to do to contrast your positions with hers. So I want to get in that, but just a little bit about you first. Your background in advocacy. Can you talk about your political background? You had you ran for governorship in 2018.
Yeah. So I've been working for 37 years as an advocate for progressive causes and social services and nonprofits in Maine. For almost four decades. And it's funny. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and my dad said to us kids, he said, you make sure you leave a place better than you found it. So he meant sweep the floor and make the bed. I thought he meant change the world. So I was like, okay, I'm in. So my first job was actually knocking on doors to extend the ratification period for the Equal Rights Amendment back in the 70s. And then I worked for a women's peace organization looking at the military budget and trying to end the nuclear arms race. And then in Maine, I worked for a women's lobby, the Maine Commission for Women. And then I was pretty appalled during both of those jobs that the only people that were paid to actually be in the legislature and advocate were corporate representatives and corporate lobbyists. But I represented women and children and low income folks. And I was like, but we're the people who need a voice there, but none of the organizations could afford that. So I said, well, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna figure this out? So I just figured that if we could have a lot of organizations pay a little bit, we could at least have someone there who would be there at 2:00 in the morning and have a seat at the table in those back rooms when the budget decisions were being made and those deals were being made. And so that's how I started my own advocacy business, and that's what I've been doing for 37 years.
Fantastic. And the family medical leave is an accomplishment. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, when I started, I'll start at the women's lobby. When I started, again, this is in the early 80s. One of the first things that I did was help people. I helped pass the minimum wage, the first minimum wage increase in decades of a dime. It was 10 cents we were working on. But we were fighting both the Democratic and the Republican establishment. But the thing that was so unique about that, Eric, at the time was that women's organizations had not been involved in economic issues. We were sort of allowed to work on reproductive choice and daycare and occasionally maybe a teaching issue or a nurse's issue. But in terms of women sitting at the table around economic policy and tax policy, that didn't happen. So, and we were the ones we won by 1 vote. And we were the ones who convinced George Bern, the guy who actually made the deciding vote. It was the women who got to him. So that was exciting. And then I went to the Commission for Women, which was a state agency, and we passed the first Family Medical Leave Act. I wrote it and we passed it in 1986, the first one in the country that then became the model for the National Family Medical Leave Act. And, I didn't do it as part of a cool political agenda. I did it because I was working with people in Maine, women and men, who were losing their jobs or afraid that they were going to lose their jobs to take when they were staying home to take care of a sick spouse or a child or a sibling. And it just so was at odds with Maine values. No one thought that if you were going to stay home and take care of someone who was sick, that you should lose your job over that. And so I actually worked with people on both sides of the aisle to make that happen. And as I said, it was then used as a model for the national law. And then,
That's incredible.
yeah, it was. And again, this was back, I know it's hard to believe, but this was back in 1986. And now we're talking about paid leave, which is awesome, so that everyone can take advantage of it. But back then, again, this was unheard of, And I think that, and then the other thing that I am really, really proud of is that, so a lot of progressive organizations, we weren't making progress in a lot of things. And we realized it was because of the people who were investing in politicians, the money in politics issue. Now, investing. And they want a return on their investment, right? So, right. But this is at a time, so in 1994, I started doing the research with a bunch of college interns in my attic because nothing was electronic then, so we had papers laid out all over the place. And we found examples, like very specific examples of a vote that was taken, money that was raised, and then the vote changed. Because I said, when we do that, people get that money's the problem, but they don't know what to do about it. So we found those examples, and then, this is when we were mad because state Senate races were costing $6,000. We were appalled. So, for the day, right? But anyway, so then we wrote the first public financing system of elections in the country. So Maine now is one of 2 states that you can run for the state legislature as a senator or representative or governor as a clean elections candidate. We call it the Clean Elections campaign program. And it pairs very small dollar donors, $5 donors, with public financing. And so it's extraordinary. And it has totally changed who can run and how we run. And then it was really comprehensive when we first passed it. And of course, the legislature has whittled away at it. So it doesn't deal with leadership PACs and stuff the way it used to, but it's still an extraordinary program. And then I ran for governor using the Clean Elections Act, and which was also an amazing thing. So.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. Not necessarily like the race, and you overperformed expectations in that race, is fair to say. But I think name recognition is a huge thing in politics. So, what did you learn from that race that you've carried into your Senate race?
Well, as you said, Eric, it was a 7-way primary, and I was a clean elections candidate, and I was the only candidate that hadn't actually run for or served in elected office. Even though I had written a ton of legislation, I knew the legislature back and forth, and had trained a lot of legislators that I was actually running against, in terms of, teaching them the ropes in the legislature. But so I think the establishment thought I was going to come in 7th, and I came in within 1,200 votes, I think, of winning the nomination. So, wow. Right, but what I learned was that people are hungry for real policy and for doing things differently. They're sick of having things so priced out of their range that they think their vote and their voice doesn't matter at all. And they're right. They're not wrong about that. So I think that hunger was really important. And then in this race, translating it to this race, I'm the only one of the 3 of us, the candidates, who has run a statewide race before in Maine. And we are small population, but we are a big state. And, and so a former governor said to me, Betsy, no one except for one governor has ever run statewide and won before they ran statewide first and lost. So I checked that box. I did that. So, so again, the other thing that was so cool about the governor's race, Eric, was that because we were different and because we were out of the box and strong progressives with strong progressive ideas, our voters were really, really fired up and loyal. And so in ranked choice voting, until the end, people, especially when there's 7 candidates, people are like, well, who do I want to put first and who do I put third? And, and so there was a poll done right near the end, and they asked everyone who had said that who their preference was, how willing would you be to change your vote, change your ranking, change your order? And most of them, about 70% of the other candidates average, said that they would be willing to change their order. My candidates, only 15% of them said that they would be willing to change their order. So, we have a bunch of loyal people around the state, and they have come through in, very strongly in this campaign. So we're excited. We are really excited.
Awesome. I want to get into some of the policy planks, but let me ask a little bit about Maine. As I understand it, Maine, it's a big agricultural state. There's shipbuilding and fisheries. Can you talk about what you're hearing, in terms of them policy-wise that would motivate them, to move you for public advocacy to serve them?
Yeah. So you named shipbuilding and fisheries, and our lobster industry, especially agriculture industry, our forestry industry, and one of the things is that the whole climate crisis, like, we live it. Our economy is dependent on our natural resources, and so we are dependent. Those industries are dependent on a leader who is going to actually go do something about this, not nibble around the edges, not, I say bringing a watering can to the edge of the bonfire, right? But to actually go and say, no, we have to do something. Because like the Gulf of Maine is warming, the second most rapidly warming body of water in the world. And my grandpa was a lobsterman. And so I have a lot of buddies, men and women who fish for a living and are, second and third generation fishermen and women. And, if I go out there and ask them and say, hey, let's talk about climate change, they're like, oh, Betsy, shut up. We don't want to talk about that. But if I say, how's your catch doing? Oh, then we can have a conversation. And what happened is 3 years ago, they had great catches because all the lobsters were moving north from Massachusetts and Rhode Island, headed up. And the problem is they kept going because the water is so warm and so acid, they have to go further north and deeper. So we're going to lose the capacity for people to make a living fishing. And that's like our claim to fame, So I think climate change is one. I think the other thing is that for all of those industries, the sort of economic divide in this country between the sort of what I call the economic elite and everybody else is just so wide. And we feel it. We have very few people who fit the economic elite, the billionaires and the millionaires, and some of them come for the summer. But in terms of people who actually live here, are very few of those folks. And so we have, and when we see over and over again, federal dollars, federal programs that benefit, whether that's a tax policy or research and development that go to those most profitable corporations, people are like, what, And like in agriculture here in Maine, one of the things that's so exciting to me is the whole idea of regenerative agriculture, which is, so it's no-till farming, it's mob grazing of animals, it's rotation of crops. It's not sexy, it's not big changes, just the way we do things differently. But it can sequester about 80% of the carbon that's in the air. So here's this thing that is really great for the climate, really good for agriculture. And Maine is a leader in the whole regionalization, food to table, all that. We don't get any federal money to do that. All the federal incentive money for agriculture goes to Monsanto and Del Monte, and so I think if we could actually see the government actually incentivizing help for small farmers and farmers that are organic farmers that are doing this regenerative thing, that's a win-win-win situation, that people would feel a lot better about government and about their elected officials. And so those are the kind of things that I think people are clamoring for. But I think a lot of people have lost hope. I think a lot of people feel like, government's never going to do anything for me. It's just a problem.
Yeah, it's cronyism is a bipartisan issue, right? So we don't want to spend a ton of time talking about how terrible Susan Collins is, because I think we all kind of get it. But just can you talk about, maybe specifically how she's left Maine behind on some of these issues you're talking about?
Yeah. So certainly the one that everybody knows about was Kavanaugh, right, which was a punch to the gut to those of us who have worked with her before on pro-choice issues, and we could actually count on her to help us with that and be a Republican that was good on those issues and LGBTQ issues. And she's gone, she's gone. But so that's one. The tax cuts is another one. She was the deciding vote on tax cuts. Even in this PPP, the help for businesses, she made a big deal about it here in Maine. But we are 49th in the country in terms of the money that we got, because the money went to all big corporations. It didn't go to small businesses that we needed. So, and I talk to people all the time, and I talk to a lot of Republicans who say to me, I will never vote for Susan Collins again. I voted for her every time. And, I'm like, okay, well, I get that for Democrats and progressives, but I'm curious when a Republican says that to me, right? So I say, well, what is it? Is it an issue? Is it tax cuts? Is it, what is it? And it's not that at all. It's really, for all of them, it's some sense of betrayal
Mm.
Like that she has really become the senator of Washington and of Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. And, and the reason is because, she gets this pass from the national media and from the local media too about being a moderate. But the thing is that she is only a moderate when they don't need her. So if they have the votes to do what they need to do, they let her do whatever she wants to do. But if she's the deciding vote, on the Supreme Court justice or on tax cuts or whatever, she is with them 100% of the time. And, that's how people feel betrayed. And she did this thing that was so stupid in my view. But anyway, she was up here and they were talking about, remember when Trump wanted to take money from the military families and put it towards the border wall that Mexico was going to pay for? Yeah.
Of course. Right.
Yeah. So she was like all about, this is terrible. She was up here doing press conferences, I will never vote to do that. We have to take care of our military families, blah, blah. And then a week later, she went to Washington and she was the deciding vote to do exactly that because they needed their vote. So, I think that's really where people feel that betrayal. And, and I think, progressives and Democrats and a lot of independents feel like it's an issue-based thing. But I think for other people, for a lot of Republicans and a lot of more conservative independents, it's more like she just doesn't care about Maine enough anymore. She doesn't recognize us. So, and her approval rating is just like,
yeah. I like that you use the word betrayal. That's a strong word, right? We need fighters, and she does that gaslighting dance where she's going to end up on the vote if they need it, exactly as you say. But she gets out there and feigns moderation, but we know full well she's going to fall in line, right? So
it was like oh my God, the Kavanaugh vote. I just can't even tell you. As someone who's been a women's advocate for 40 years, that was like a punch to the gut, and I don't know why. But I forced myself to watch her 45-minute speech on the floor of the Senate. And I'm sad. I'm sad now to this day. I can't sort of unsee it. I wish I could. But, the fact that she, just went on and on and on. And I can't tell you the hundreds of women that went and shared their stories with her. Stories that we've never told before about abuse and about things that happened to them in college and high school. And, she listened and then she turned around and did exactly the wrong thing. And it was just like, it really felt like a punch to the gut.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you're going to fight for rather than what you're fighting against, right? So I have a slide here that's got some of your platform on it, and we can kind of talk about them in general terms or specific terms. Medicare for all. Can you talk about the critical need for that in Maine?
Well, if we didn't think it was critical before the COVID pandemic, I think we're all pretty clear it's critical now. And I think the idea of tying medical care to employment has always been a bad idea. But now there's 40 million Americans who are living, the fact that it's a terrible idea. So ideally, that's 40 million more people who are willing to help us, and be advocates for this program. But, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And this, and your listeners know this. It's cheaper. It's, it takes away the profit motive. Think about it, right? We have a system right now that is designed to deny you and I as much care as possible to maximize the profits for the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industries. Like that's their job. Like that's how it works. And that is immoral in my view, and I've met, so many people. This is the number one thing that has come up on the campaign trail. And I met a woman, oh my gosh, this is such a story. And, a woman who was diagnosed with cancer and actually had a pretty decent prognosis in terms of how, she could do. And I said, well, I'm so sorry, and please keep in touch with me. Let me know how it goes. And she said, oh, I'm not doing the treatment. I said, really? And she said, yeah, I'm not. And I said, why? I said, do you not have insurance? She said, no, I have insurance. She said, but I refuse to spend the rest of my days, whether it's 2 days or 2 months or 20 years, fighting every day with an insurance company about, is this PET scan covered? Is this drug covered? Are you going to pay for this? What's my out-of-pocket going to be for this? She said, I can't do it. It's too stressful, and I really would rather live in peace. Yeah. That story to me is not even about policy. That's about who we are as people, as Americans, And so to me, that's the driving kind of force that I think we have to fight for this for. And again, the thing that's so cool, I think, is that this could be our Social Security moment for healthcare, right? When Social Security was first introduced, everyone said, "Ah, forget it. That's crazy. It's pie in the sky. It's never going to happen." And then the Depression happened. And then all of a sudden, there were thousands of elderly and disabled people who were starving to death and couldn't eat and couldn't heat their homes and stuff. And so all of a sudden, Social Security became this great idea and has become the largest, most successful anti-poverty program in the history of this country. So now we're in the COVID pandemic, where people don't have health care and they are scared to death and they don't know what to do and they've lost their jobs and they can't get Affordable Care Act because it's not open enrollment. And right, so this might be our moment. And that's why it's so important to have people to go down who are willing to fight for this, stand up and pull the curtain back on why we don't have it and actually make it happen.
Awesome. I want to actually contrast your website with one of your opponents in the primary, because there's, we talked about Susan Collins doing that gaslighting type of deal, right? So there's truth in the language we use, right? So you and I know this, and I know you chose these words explicitly, but some voters don't know this and they kind of buy into this sometimes, right? So if you look at your website, you clearly say healthcare is a human right, Medicare for all, bold, right? No question about it. If I scroll down, this is a screen cap, but if I scroll down, it would say guaranteed. That's what you're talking about, a universality program, right? Whereas your opponent has, this language, which is tired and consultant tested, that healthcare is a right. They say it, but then they say access is always the key word, right? Everyone should have access to quality and affordable healthcare, right? Access is meaningless if you can't afford it. Guaranteed is Medicare for all, which is what you stand for, right? So, it behooves us all to, get accustomed to those. Those are the words that this cycle. There's a lot of talk about choice. In a presidential election, it was choice, right? But it's always access to quality and affordable healthcare, right? And I watched that debate last night, and your opponent did use the word access probably more than any other word when she talked about access to education, access to this, access to that, right? Can you talk about that, just that in general, that, that kind of corporately sponsored moderation versus true public advocacy?
Yeah, well, it's meaningless, right? I mean, of course we all have, everyone has access right now. You have enough money, you can buy healthcare. And that's the problem, right? I mean, access, same thing to education. You have enough money, you can buy a college education. But if you don't have enough money, access is meaningless. Even access to reproductive health, which she talks about. That's great. But if we don't have Medicare for all, and in Maine, all our rural hospitals and healthcare centers are shutting down because they can't make enough money. So access is meaningless if there's no facilities, if there's nobody who will perform the service, right? So it is such a poll tested word, and I swear, I think every single thing in that website and I think the websites of all of the DSCC sponsored candidates in the Senate are the same. I mean, if you look at them, it's a little frightening to see the exact same thing. But it's really this, this idea of access, and wouldn't it be nice if we all could just not have to really change anything and just do a little tweak here and there and everyone get access. But it's meaningless. And I think that I'm hoping, and I found in my run for governor and in this run too, that people are seeing that and they're hungry for policy specifics. They're hungry for it. And it's, and it's like, so anyway, I think we see it over and over again. And so I hope that people are at a moment where, they see through the veil of the consultant soundbite and they're, saying, okay, who's going to actually go fight for us, Yeah,
great. Yeah. The other policy that I want to touch on a little bit is Green New Deal, right? Obviously, we talked about lobsters in Maine, and you talked about, talking to your constituents about that. It's the same exact approach from her site to your site. You explicitly are saying Green New Deal, we have to act boldly, delaying is no different than denying at this point. Whereas her site is, we should get back to the Paris Accord, and we should, make clean energy a priority and spend more money on it. Can you talk about the contrast between you and her on that issue, Green New Deal?
Yeah, it's a really big contrast, actually. This is a really big one too, just like healthcare. But, and Maine has done some things because it's so important here. But one of the things that we're so proud of that we passed, excuse me, which is a step, is to become fossil fuel free by 2045. Well, I think we're going to be burnt to a crisp by 2045. It's just 100 degrees in the Arctic, right? So I don't think we got to 2045, quite honestly. And so, and I think that, again, the first thing we have to do, I think, is take the $20 billion that you and I are giving in our tax dollar money in subsidies to the fossil fuel companies. Not in tax credits, but in actually cash money. And I did this as when I went around, when I had all my town halls, I said, okay, so how many of you know that? First of all, nobody knows. And I said, okay, now let's take a vote. Okay,
it wasn't many. Not many people knew that about the subsidies.
Almost nobody knew that. I mean, we knew there were subsidies, but whatever. It sounds like subsidies. It's just like it's Washington speaks, so no one knows what that means. I'm like, no. This is $20 billion a year. Okay, so we can spend $20 billion and giving it to these wealthy oil companies doing something that that's killing us. Raise your hand if we should spend it on that, or raise your hand if you want to spend it on healthcare or infrastructure or student debt or renewable energy, right? So no one ever voted for the subsidies. so that's not, that's not surprising, but so it's some of the obvious stuff that we have to pull the curtain back on in Washington. And we need people to go down there and say, when people say, oh, how are you going to afford anything, X, Y, or Z, right? Anything. I always say, well, let's start here. Let's pull the curtain back on what we're actually spending money on. And we won't even talk about the tax code and everything else. That's a next step. But let's just talk about what we're actually spending money on. And people are shocked at the kinds of things that we're spending money on. $1.35 trillion on a bomber system in the Pentagon that doesn't work, that we're still paying for. Like, what? And so, I mean, those kinds of things are just, we're pretty practical here in Maine. We're pretty good common sense folks. And we're like, no, that's not going to happen. But we can't make those decisions if no one's talking about it,
Right. Yeah. How about, and it's hard to get that message out there, right? Challenging to, like you said, you had town halls, you had face-to-faces, or, I'm assuming that's pre-pandemic or virtually, right? But, it's hard to get that message out there, to break that through. Yeah. Like you said, the term access, that's poll tested. So, they know how to do that. And they want people uninformed, right? As much as possible. So how about free public college? I imagine technical schools would be a big thing in Maine, a big boom.
Yeah. And I mean, that's included as well, of course. But, I think about it, and it's true in Maine, and I'm sure it's true around the rest of the country. But, think about it. When we were an agrarian society, we paid for free education through the 8th grade. And then people could go work in the fields. And then when we had the Industrial Revolution and you needed to know how to read and write better and stuff, we paid for education through high school. And now our economy requires that you have either a technical education or a college education to actually, not just for your own fulfillment, which is great, but to fulfill the roles we need in our economy. So it just makes sense that we would say, oh, okay, things have changed. Now let's make public education free through college, like so many other countries in the world do, right? So I think, again, it's a matter of priorities. We have to look at how we're spending money. And in this country, and you know this, Eric, but we spend less on our Department of Education than we do on this fossil fuel subsidy. Yeah. And think about during the pandemic, right? Every school district in the nation was dealing with how to do distance learning and how to do, teaching over the internet and stuff, and which had a whole bunch of issues and class issues about kids who don't have internet and don't have computers at home. And in Maine, we don't have broadband all over the state because we got places where they can't even get cell phone service. So, it raises a whole bunch of issues. And so, but what the federal Department of Education, silence, nothing. They're just rolling back, sexual harassment legislation that schools have to deal with. So anyway, I just think that it's time, and I don't think it's rocket science that we need this for our economy and for our future American workers. And I think, and then if you related to that, of course, is student debt. And student debt. I've got twins who just graduated in May from college, and a daughter who graduated 4 years ago. So student debt is very much an issue in our home, but it's crushing an entire generation, right? So these kids who now who won't for a long time be able to buy a car or a home or start to raise a family. And in Maine, most jobs pay not enough to be able to pay for your housing and your student loan. So for my kids, it's like they can't take a job in Maine, most jobs, So but and I know this sounds like rhetoric, but it's so true. It's like, well, we can bail out Wall Street and we can bail out banks with no payback. And even during this pandemic is the one that gets under my skin. We can bail out cruise lines who register in other countries so they don't pay a dime in taxes to this country. And we're going to use our tax dollars to bail them out, but we're not going to bail out our kids. Come on. That doesn't match our values.
Yeah, and we can pass a military budget without hesitation, right? Let me ask you about that. If you make it to the Senate floor, which would be amazing, and you're confronted with a military budget, right? Or some of these things that you have to, how do you cast that difficult vote, right? Do you if Chuck Schumer, let's say, picks up the phone and calls you and says, "Hey, we're all doing this on this bill," what do you do if it's against your?
I think I say, "Good luck, Chuck." And more seriously, I'm sure there's those votes that you're going to have to take where you just have to hold your nose. But military budget, I think we have to really open the conversation about our entire approach to our foreign policy. As I said early on, my first job after the ERA, working on the ERA, was working for a women's peace organization where my whole job was analyzing the military budget back then. And this was in 1979, 1980. And there are so many things. And, if you think about going back to values, the military budget is supposed to keep us safe and secure. Well, now our security is much more threatened by cyber attacks and drone strikes and climate crisis and pandemic. Pandemic. It is by missiles and bombers and tanks. And yet we continue to build those weapons and then sell them to other countries because we don't really need them. And that's all just doing the defense contractors' bidding. So I think we can reclaim, and we've lost our position as world leaders, I think, in humanitarianism and democracy and, being, a model for the rest of the world. And I think we can regain it by really looking at the humanitarian aid that we give and looking at really investing in diplomacy and our State Department and approaching it through those lenses instead of how do we keep our defense contractors happy, And so, my daughter, one of my daughters was, she did a service project in Tanzania for a year. And she said it was amazing. She said she talked to a lot of her colleagues at the hospital that she worked in. And she said, it used to be that the United States was really responsible for helping us, build roads and get fresh drinking water. And now the United States is nowhere. And it's the Chinese who are coming in and building the roads and, helping with drinking water supplies and building hospitals and stuff. And so we've just really shifted to this militaristic thing. And we've, dropped out of all these alliances with our, allies and stuff. And it just, and it would be a hell of a lot cheaper as well. So I'm not willing to vote on stuff until we've had some of the hard conversations. And I think part of what I want to do as a senator is to bring people in to really start to have the hard conversations and, open those things up, because there's so many things that are off limits. Like, oh, don't talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. That's going to offend. And almost always that's going to offend our donors. And it's all just relate. I hate to, it's not that simplistic, but I think it is, and so we have to go back to that, I think, and say, we're not going to do this. And we're going to open up this uncomfortable conversation.
Great. Yeah. So like Bernie just put forward a motion, I guess, last week to cut 10%. Like that'd be something you'd be all in on, right? With that.
At the start, right. We spend more on our military budget than the next 7 countries combined.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That includes everybody: China, Japan, Russia, Japan. Come on. So anyway, yeah. So I'd be all in on that. But again, I think we have to. I think we have to have the conversations and point out to people what we are spending money on. And I think American people, if we just did a simple show of hands, I think that we could generate enough pressure from our constituents and voters across this country that legislators we have to build up enough pressure that they're willing to go against their funders to do the thing that they think might get them unelected.
Yeah, and the military industrial complex, if you will, the Raytheons, they are huge donors, so that's why there are scant voices like yours, and all the more need for voices like yours.
And
Let me
yeah, go ahead. No, go, please.
Yeah, let me show some of the endorsements that you have. So you're endorsed by Justice Democrats, brand new Congress, Our Revolution, Democracy for America, Marianne Williamson, the great Susan Sarandon, some pretty heavy hitters on the progressive side of things, which is great. Any of these other policies that you want to kind of make mention of? Money out of politics, we kind of talked about. Education, human rights. Anything else you want to hit on policy wise?
Well, I just want to say one more thing about money in politics, because again, it is the thing that I've spent the last 30 years of my life working on, because I do think it's the rotting core of our democracy. Because if we don't get that taken care of, I don't think that we're going to ever make real progress on all these other things, And so I have this. Did I say? Stop me if I said this already. But I have this 3-point plan. Did I talk about this?
No, go for it, please.
I had 4 today, so forgive me. I have this 3-point plan. So one is, of course, to get rid of Citizens United, which is a constitutional amendment. The other thing is to create a clean election system like we have in Maine that pairs $5 contributions. So you show that you have support with public financing. And then the third thing is, and this is the most out of the box thing, but I think it's so important, is we limit the campaign season to 12 weeks. Because no one needs to hear this stuff for 2 years or constantly, And I think first of all, it costs a ton of money, and it just benefits what I call the political industrial complex. All the consultants and pollsters who tell you what to say, how to say it, what to wear, who to talk to, all that. And I think that so we've got that going on. And then I think that, again, other countries do this, right? So England is 6 weeks. The Nordic countries are 8 weeks. Canada's 30 days. Japan is 12 days. Can you imagine a 12-day presidential cycle? I mean, what happens, right, is that people pay a lot of attention for that time. But when it's spread out and you're watching commercials nonstop for months and months and months on end, people are like, oh, I've had it, So to be really clear, people could announce that they were going to run a year out or 2 years out, and they could do this. They could talk to people. They could go to people's homes. They could have town halls. They could do that. What they couldn't do is raise and spend money. And so I think that it's just a radical notion. Again, we have to talk about, and I tell you, when I had all my town halls before we got COVID shut down, people would get up and clap, stand up, standing ovation for that, because they don't want to hear this stuff, And so anyway, so I think it leads to cynicism. It leads to people saying enough, enough, enough. So anyway, so I think those are, those are things that we have to do. And again, the other thing, and again, this is part of the telling to be a truth teller, we have to connect the dots. We have to say the reason that we cannot afford insulin in this country and we have kids dying because they're cutting their insulin when they turn 26 is because exactly related to the $7 billion a year that the pharmaceutical companies spend in political donations. Those things are 100% related. And so I think we just have to, again, call it out, talk about it, and, really help people understand not only what the problem is, because I think we all sort of feel it, but also what a solution could be.
Yeah. And there are real clear lines, like we were talking about with the terminology in terms of, sort of corporately owned, invested in candidates, right? Versus, true advocates that are fighting for, progressive values and, from a principled position, right? So, your position on ending endless wars, comes from sort of a principled center rather than a donor who purchased you to say something, right? And maybe even handed you a series of words to say, right? And in so many races, those are so clear. It's so clear. It's just people need to learn it, right? People need to see it.
Right. Well, I don't know. You said you watched the debate last night, but there was one of those moments that were just like I was flabbergasted. We were asked a question about the Middle East and about Palestinian and Israel and Palestinian rights and what's happening in the West Bank and all that. And my primary opponent said, "I support Israel. I support," and I felt like, I felt like it was this clarion call to say to my donors, it's okay. You can still keep giving me money. It's all right. And I just, and then went on to say, we need a two-state solution and, blah, blah. But it was
Right.
the opening salvo was, you can still give money to me because I am good on this issue, and it was just, it was striking. It was so striking to me. So.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, but I think J Street might be one of her big donors, which they kind of walk a line, right? So I'm sure that was a well-rehearsed response.
Yeah.
And of course, I noticed you got the "How are you going to pay for it?" Medicare for all question, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about how can people.
Well, yeah. Can I say the how can you pay for it question?
Yeah.
I know we know that it's going to be $2 trillion cheaper. And what people are really worried about is who you're going to write the check to, right? So if you write a check to an insurance company and you're paying this much into the deductibles, everyone's okay with it. But if you're writing a check this big and it happens to go to the US government, then all of a sudden that's like hysteria, right? So anyway, but I think also, when we want to go into a war or we want to bail out big companies for COVID, all of a sudden we got $2.8 trillion that never was there before. And so when we want to do it, when we determine that it's a necessity, we come up with the money. So I'm like, once we did that, I was like, I am never again going to fall in the trap of having to say, how are we going to pay for it? So anyway.
Yeah. I was surprised to see that. It was like a public television, I'm not saying the debate host had that. It's so in the DNA of, kind of the people that just casually pay attention to politics, right? It's been propagandized about Medicare for all. How are you going to pay for it? That's almost a knee-jerk response, which, is a challenge for us to overcome.
Yeah.
So the election is on July 14th. Obviously, we're in a pandemic. It's ranked choice. Can you talk about, I'm assuming it's a mail-in. How can people vote? How can they help between here and there?
Oh, thanks, Eric. Yeah, that's great. So we're having both mail-in absentee ballots. We have early voting right now, so you can go to your town hall right now and vote. And you're also going to be able to go to the polls on July 14th. And so they're hoping that with a combination of those things, that there won't be, I don't think we're going to see the long lines that we saw in Wisconsin or in Atlanta. And we are, keeping as many polling places open as possible. So I'm hoping that we're not going to have those kind of issues here. And we are the only thing on the ballot, because we had a presidential primary in March. So, so I think that's, going to also affect how people, how many people come out to vote. So, but it's hard to tell, right, in COVID, how you're doing, because you don't have all those crowds and stuff, but our momentum is crazy. I mean, it is just, people are coming out of the woodwork. People are sort of seeing like exactly what you've been talking about, which is, oh, we have this polished candidate, supported, told what to do candidate. And then we got Betsy, and then we have Bree, who's the third candidate. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. And then it's like, okay, well, I think one of my benefits is that I'm not just progressive, which is I'm very proud of, but I've been getting things done for 37 years for people in Maine, and I work on every budget that we've had. And so I think people are, and then the other thing is that we're exciting young people who have never voted before, who got very energized by the Black Lives Matter movement and rising up against institutional and systemic racism, who are registering to vote now, and who are all coming to us because we were there with them shoulder to shoulder and have been for 30 years. But anyway, so that's a really exciting thing. And so we are doing calling every day between now and July 14th, and you can do that from anywhere in the country. So if you can help us, pick up the phone. And the other thing is, everybody knows somebody in Maine. Like, I don't know, everybody has, my uncle lives in Maine, or my sister's friend lives in Maine, or my roommate from college. So if you have people in Maine that call them up and tell them to check out betsysweet.com. And the other thing that you can do that's really important is donate. We are a small donor. We are being outspent 50-1 right now, but it's not mattering. The fact that my opponent has spent $24 million on this primary, and where there's going to be 100,000 voters, and we have spent not even $400,000, and that we are still within 1.5 points of each other, like that says something.
Yeah.
Right? You would think if you spend, I should be nowhere with someone spending $24 million and me spending, such a pittance to compare to that. But we're not. We're right in there, and that speaks to where people are. And so we have to raise about $30,000 is all we have left to raise to do everything that we want to do. And this is mostly going to go to our texting program. So if you can go to betsysweet.com, if you throw in $1, $5, $10, or $100 if you got it, that is hugely helpful. So, but again, and then the other thing is to spread the word on social media. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's Betsy Sweet Me, M-E, Maine. And get the word out. And create that momentum. And that's and we also have a TikTok channel, which I just learned about, which is so much fun that our young people have put together. That is at Sweet for Senate. So, and those are really fun. So anyway, any of that you can do and get out there and push out is really huge. So
awesome.
But I think here's the thing. Here's my biggest pitch to all of you who are watching. If you're not from Maine, we are the last best chance to elect another really progressive senator to go to Washington, D.C. And we have a stronger opportunity because of ranked choice voting, right? So if Charles Booker had ranked choice voting in Kentucky, he would be the nominee. And so we have ranked choice voting, and we are neck and neck. And we have another progressive in the race, and all of their votes, if they're not second, will come to me. And that could leapfrog us. And then imagine that. Just imagine sending a progressive with lots of experience, and we leapfrog over the $24 million candidate because of clean elections and ranked choice voting. Woo! That's like the revolution will have started.
Amazing. You mentioned Charles Booker, and it's a great comparison because he was outspent 40-1, right? Mm-hmm. And he got within a 1%, right? Within 1%. Yeah. And, it was a gut punch, right? And, a lot of progressives after that race are like, we could have had a chance, right? So if you are one of those people that felt that, Betsy's the next race, get involved, right? We can
last one, that last primary where this is happening. And so, and again, we have a really good shot. I know everyone has to say that, right? But I actually really feel it. And, people, after the debate last night, and then we had another one today, people are calling me and saying, you know what? I just want you to know I'm switching you from my number 2 vote to my number 1 vote. And again, that's the beauty of ranked choice voting. Oh, you know what? You knocked that out of the park. I'm going to give you my first vote. Oh, right. And so enough people are moving and shifting and changing, and enough young people are saying, whoa, wait a minute, July 14th? Okay, wait, what do I do? And so, we have a real shot at this. And when we win the primary, we will definitely beat Susan Collins.
Right on. Yeah, no doubt about that. Ranked choice voting also removes that thing that people think of, I'm not going to vote for the most progressive because I'm fearful they may not win, right? So, it removes that, in the voting booth, which is a blessing as well. Yes,
that's an electability thing that I always think, who decides that? Like some group of old white men in the sky at a table, I think they're the ones who decide the electability. But, in Maine and with ranked choice voting, you don't have to do that calculus. You can vote your heart, and you can vote for big solutions. And if not enough people are with us, then I shouldn't be the senator, honestly. And your vote will roll over to the next person. And so that's the coolest thing ever. And I want to introduce ranked choice voting nationally when I get there. Because imagine our presidential primary if we had ranked choice voting, we would be having a very different presidential race.
Yes, we would. Well, thank you, Betsy, for taking the time to chat with me. Hopefully you'll come back on after you win the primary. We could talk just about how terrible Susan Collins is for half an hour. That'll be great. Yeah, and thank you for your long career of advocacy. Thank you for running for the governor's race, for not letting that dissuade you. Thank you for keep fighting the fight. July 14th is the election. I wish you the best of luck. I'm certainly in your corner. So, fingers crossed.
Well, I really appreciate it. I really appreciating you sharing our story and our race with all of your listeners, and for what you do every day. And so I am very grateful for that as well, because it's really all of us together, and it's really not me, it's really us, and we have a chance to make a huge difference here. So thank you.
Perfect. Love it. Thank you.